So I hunt, and when I say hunt, I don't mean I sit in a tree stand. I mean I'm the guy out hunting by walking over the entire park with enough on my back to let me sleep at night, sort of comfortably, but little enough that I won't mind dragging 150 pounds of yummy out of the woods. So, I'm hunting a fairly large forest somewhere in the northwest corridor of the US. It's not uncommon to run into other people at the edges of the woods. It's fairly uncommon to run into people in the middle of the woods, even during hunting season, unless you're on the trails, which I wasn't, and it's decently common to run into the ruins of buildings from the 1800s there. I happened to be hunting a new valley that I was pretty sure had a crossing in it, so to set the view, I'm sitting on top of a very steep shale slide, looking down into a valley with a creek running through it. Approaching this plateau, there's a knife edge that runs up and down the ridge, but there's really no way to get up to this spot except for the seriously determined, the drunk, and the foolish, without walking up or down the ridge. Getting up here creates quite a noise from the stones sliding on the other stones, which means that I know I have to sit up here for an hour to let things settle back down after I made the ascent. Since it's such a pain in the ass, I left my day pack at the bottom under a pine tree and only had a rifle, binoculars, water, and an energy bar. I'm up here for about 3 hours, glassing this little piss of a stream, just looking for something to cross it and seeing nothing but squirrels and birds, and I just finally decide to start glazing the opposite hill out of sheer boredom. I'm 90% sure that I chose a poor spot at this state and wasted an afternoon looking at nothing. Such is hunting, though. It's got its really interesting days, and it's got its really boring days. And this is why it's called hunting and not shooting, I suppose. Anyway, as I'm screwing around with the focus on the binoculars, I catch a glimpse of something which almost looks like a person. If they were wearing dark blue clothes and about 4 feet tall. 99% of the time, the day hikers just pass by without realizing that I'm here, even with the blaze orange requirements. Or they just pretend to ignore me. But you'd be amazed how many times someone has almost walked through my stand. This person, though, they weren't moving, which started to make me think that I was wrong. It was just standing there, behind the cover of some low scrub bush and tree branches, and I would have missed it were it not for the color. I zoom out a bit to try and get my bearings and realize that I'm not looking at a person, but it's actually a collapsed cabin, and I was looking at where the door would be. Except it really looked like a person, and cabins aren't blue. I move the zoom back into the door and play with the focus for about 5 minutes, and I can't get the person to come back. In fact, the cabin door now has some light from the setting sun visible through the holes in the walls and the roof. Whatever that 4-foot-tall thing was that I was looking at, it had moved. I end up sighing to myself and just think, teenagers, right? And I have that thought and then realize something else. I can hear birds and squirrels and all the other things in the woods which typically go quiet when they notice something, which means that they didn't notice me. But that also means that they didn't notice whatever was in the cabin door a short time ago. I'm doing my best to stay quiet and not move, and whatever it was, it certainly did move. I mean, I would expect everything in the woods to have gone for cover with a teenager crashing through the brush, but the noises almost made it worse. There was something moving in the brush. I started to think that it was the trick of the light since the sun was setting and it was getting to the part of the day when tree stumps look like deer. And I knew I would have to move soon and figured that I might as well just pack up since I still had to get down off the shale and back to the pine tree where I planned to throw a tarp and sleep. At this point, I realized it wasn't dark per se, but it was overcast now. Again, the creepy experience isn't that there's something obviously wrong. It's that everything is so completely normal for what I would expect were I alone. About this time, too, a fog rolled into the valley, which the combination of overcast weather conditions, sunset, and a ground fog coming up in the wet low valley signaled that it was definitely time to leave. I checked my safety and put the caps on my glass and reached up to take my orange flag. But the moment that I grabbed the flag, the dread came, and that's the only way that I can describe it. The woods went from animals going home to sleep to full-on, you're screwed. The movement had attracted what I could only describe as 1,000 invisible eyes, which all turned in unison as they noticed me. You ever wonder what a deer feels like in the headlights? Well, this is it. But then, I heard children. I heard children laughing. Not teenagers, not adults, and definitely not women, but full-on 5-year-old kids just laughing like they caught a firefly or something. I had hiked in 5 miles the previous day through woods and put 2 more down today when I woke up to get to this spot, and I distinctly hear children laughing during what I can only describe as the most creepy moment that I've ever had in a valley that I know is completely unoccupied, having stared at it for the last 4 hours or so. I'm pretty sure that my feet only touched the shale 3 times getting down from the knife edge, and I made a ton of noise doing it too. At this point, I just didn't really care though. I grabbed the pack and my flashlight and absolutely full-on fucking rucked it to the next hilltop. I killed my light halfway up the hill too and went to the top of the hill where I just threw down a tarp and unrolled my foam, and there I just sat all night watching the hill that I just came from. In late September of 1979, my husband, my 6-year-old daughter, and we moved to Mesa, Arizona to be closer to his family. We quickly found an affordable 2-bedroom home. At 750 square feet, it was perfect for the 3 of us. It was sort of a fourplex, and it seemed like a nice place for the first month that we were there. But that all changed just before Halloween. It all started innocently enough. My 24th birthday was arriving in about 2 weeks. My mum always likes to send me a birthday card early, and this had always been her habit. And that year was no exception. When I got the mail that day, there was a card from my mum, and inside the card was some sort of birthday money. I was actually pretty tickled to receive the money since I'd been wanting a little eyeshadow duo that I had seen in a grocery store a few nights earlier. In those days, our money was pretty tight as I hadn't found a job yet. So I decided to hop on my bike and dash up to the store before my daughter got out of school that day. Before I left though, I wrote a note for my husband to let him know where I was going. My husband sometimes was able to stop by the house for lunch and that, so he was a computer service technician and he traveled all over the Phoenix Valley. And if he happened to be near the house at lunchtime, he would just drop in and stuff. So I set the note on the kitchen table and drew an arrow on it, which pointed to the card. I set the card up with ornate covering showing. This card was especially pretty as it had a birthstone set in the center of a flower on the cover. I set it up to show that, and then I left. I returned about half an hour later, and my husband wasn't there, but I saw that he had been. At least, that's what I concluded by what I saw on the table. The card was flipped over and upside down, and the part of the card visible now was on the backside, with the part that displayed the price facing forward. I was sorry that I missed seeing my husband, but I thought he was really clever in letting me know that he had been there by flipping the card in that manner. When he arrived home at the end of his workday, I told him how I was sorry that I had missed him when he stopped in for lunch. But he didn't know what I was talking about, and apparently he hadn't been by the house that whole day. That really freaked me out because I made such a production of setting the card up to show the birthstone. So there was no room in my mind to doubt myself, and finally though, I told myself that I must have somehow flipped the card over myself or something. I mean, I just had to tell myself this to be able to sleep that night. A week went by with no other strange happenings, and then, lo and behold, another spooky thing occurred. I was home alone doing some housework, and I was washing dishes when I realized that I needed to go and pee. When I got back to the kitchen, I saw a really strange sight. My drinking glass was turned upside down on the side of the sink, and I knew I hadn't left it there, and a chill ran up my spine. And then the strange occurrences became more pronounced. I would leave a room and return to find an object turned upside down on a regular basis. It was so odd because I would literally leave a room and return within seconds sometimes, and there was just no way that anyone could have come and gone without me seeing them. It was a total impossibility, in fact. But the worst part was that no one wanted to believe me too. These things only seemed to occur to torment me. One day, though, my sister-in-law Cindy was over. We were sitting at the kitchen table at the time, and I was cooking us some macaroni and cheese or something. We also had a pot of coffee going. Anyway, as soon as I had finished telling her about all the weird things, she did something crazy. Cindy said aloud, "If you're there, show yourself." And at the instant the words were gone from her mouth, the electricity died. The macaroni cheese stopped cooking, and the Mr. Coffee shut off, and we both ran outside. We ran to the back of the fourplex to where the breaker box was, and we looked inside the box, but no breakers were tripped off. I need to also add that no one was around outside that day but us. We called the electricity company to send out a repairman, and when he arrived, he quickly found the problem and fixed it. We asked him what the problem had been, and he told us that a pertinent part was missing from the breaker box, and he just replaced it. That one really spooked Cindy and me because we had gone immediately outside when the electricity died. No one had been outside, and even if a human had done it, what were the odds of it occurring just when Cindy had asked the presence to show itself? After this incident, I was beginning to become terrified. At first, the entity seemed almost playful. Turning objects upside down seemed quite harmless, if I'm being honest. Playing games with the breaker box seemed more powerful and cunning and somewhat sinister. One rainy morning, after my daughter left for school, I decided to go back to bed for a while. My husband had gone to work early that morning, and I wasn't too surprised, though, when I heard him coming up the sidewalk with his keys jangling. I heard him open the front door and come into the apartment, and I decided to keep the covers over my head. I was pretending to be asleep, and I was going to wait until he came into the room and said something before I greeted him. Silly, I know, but I heard him come into the room, and he was standing by the bed. I could hear him breathing, and yet he never spoke. But finally, I whipped the covers off my head and yelled boo, and there was no one there. At this point, I was petrified. I was getting up out of the bed with the intention of putting on my clothes as quickly as possible to get out of the house, but just as I stood up beside the bed, something pushed me back down. I was screaming and crying for it to stop, but this appeared to anger this thing as it pushed me even harder and more forcibly. I feared I would be crushed and nobody would even understand my death or how it had occurred. But just then, when I felt I couldn't take any more pressure and live, it stopped. Just as quickly as it had all happened, it was just over. Well, I got dressed and drove to my mother-in-law's house for the day, and I was not going to stay alone in that house anymore. Well, at least not that day anyway. I had begun to have these awful nightmares of a dismembered body too. I dreamt that our house was on a patch of land that had been used as a Native American burial ground. The dreams were confusing because not only did I dream of the burial grounds, but I also dreamt of a cannibalistic man dressed as the proverbial cowboys of the Old West. The nightmares were confusing and revolting and evil in a way that I was utterly horrified by. In fact, the nightmares grew so dark and gruesome that I began to dread going to sleep. Soon after these experiences, I got a job that would keep me away from the house during the day. I worked weekdays from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m, and that was perfect for me because our daughter got out of school at 3 p.m. Therefore, I would hardly ever be alone in the house, and neither would she, more importantly. My husband would drive her to school before we went to work, and I'd always be there to pick her up after school, and I liked that just fine. I can recall my first day at my new job, and there was such a feeling of elation to be away from the frightening things that were going on inside my apartment that I had to catch myself. I even wondered if the entity was upset that I wasn't there to torment. One day, though, this presence still managed to give me a spook. I had just picked up my daughter from school, and we were going over to my mother-in-law's house, but my daughter wanted to change her clothes first. We stopped by our apartment, and I went to the bathroom while she changed in her bedroom. As I was washing my hands in the bathroom, I decided to move a little plaque off of the bathroom shelf and put it away. The plaque read, "All that I like is either immoral, illegal, or fattening." And for some reason that day, the plaque just made me feel disgusted, and I hated its message. So I took it off the shelf and put it into the cabinet underneath the bathroom sink. I noticed that the shelf needed to be dusted as there was a clean line where the plaque had rested. I decided to leave the dusting until I returned home from my mother-in-law's house. The time passed quickly as we visited with my in-laws, and we finally returned home, and I was glad that I made it home before my husband because I still needed to dust the bathroom shelf before starting dinner. I got some cleaning supplies from under the kitchen sink and went into the bathroom, and I stood frozen in shock at what I saw. There sat the plaque, exactly where it had been before I'd moved it and put it away. It had even been set meticulously back the way it had been, sitting perfectly in line with all the dust surrounding it. I rushed my daughter out of the house into the car, and I drove straight to a payphone and called my mother-in-law. She sent my brother-in-law over to stay with us until my husband came home, and it didn't really help that much to have someone else there because I was just utterly terrified of being in this apartment at this point, which eventually resulted in us leaving. That May, we got our tax refund, and we used that money to move, quick smart. We moved away from Mesa and got an apartment in Phoenix. Luckily, whatever that thing was didn't follow us to our new home, and for that, I'm grateful. This isn't going to be your typical paranormal story, but it's probably the most frightening one that I've been to in 10 years, simply because of the human element. So, the call came out as a simple suspicious person at a large nursing home with not that many more details. Myself and a buddy showed up to find a woman just waiting out front next to her vehicle. The vehicle was off, and she carried a baby with her, maybe 3 years old, but still with those cherubic baby angel cheeks. The administrator tells me the woman in question, whom I'll refer to as Tracy, is a contracted worker for them, a sort of nurse who comes in from time to time to help out with their elderly patients. She shows up on her day off and starts talking to this elderly gentleman, Joe. Tracy places her baby in Joe's lap and wheels him out of the facility, with Joe screaming the whole time. But they stop her, and she gets mad because they're holding her grandfather hostage and she just wants to take him for a walk. The only thing is, Joe is not related to Tracy and is a retired cop himself. But Tracy then gets distracted and tries stealing medication and scratches another nurse when they stop her. By all accounts, not 6 hours earlier, Tracy was just an ordinary woman. She went to work without complaint, seemed happy, and then just went home. No history of drug use, no history of mental illness. The facility was reluctant to pursue charges due to the sudden abrupt shift in her personality, in fact. Like she'd been replaced with another woman who looked just like her but was criminally insane. The funny thing is, while speaking to her, Tracy seems normal. She tells me in a very calm and obviously not crazy voice what she's doing and why. She gives me all the information and doesn't cause any problems or give me reason to take her into custody. I mean, Joe didn't want to press charges and the facility declined as well. The only thing giving me cause that something was wrong was Tracy insisting Joe was her grandfather, which we proved that she was not. My only other recourse was a sort of emergency custody order, mental health, but I really had no reason to do so. I mean, her son looked well cared for, so we elected to call for family to arrive. Her father showed up and confirmed that Tracy was okay. She didn't take drugs and had never complained about mental health or physical ailments that would lead us to believe that something was wrong. I even spoke to a magistrate about securing charges to get her treated, since she refused to do so on her own, but he declined right off. The only option we had was the father trying to get a custody order against her. He took a few minutes speaking to her before pulling me aside, saying, "I can tell you that that woman looks like my daughter, but that's not my daughter." As this is happening, I hear the car door open and the doors lock, and my stomach dropped, and I couldn't tell you why. Consider it a sixth sense that all cops have or are issued after time spent on the force or something. Sometimes someone just sets off a trigger that you can't explain, and you better bloody listen to it. Inside the car, Tracy is holding a bouncing little boy in her arms. I knock on the window and ask if we can talk more, but she refuses. I ask if her father can hold the baby, and she tells me that's not my father. I tried to negotiate while my supervisor, who witnessed the whole thing thankfully, tried other doors. He took over talking to her while I positioned myself on the other side of the car, trying to open door handles. Both of our warning flags were going off, and for some reason we just couldn't say why. I mean, she gave no reason and we had no real cause. Then Tracy says, "You're just trying to take away my baby," and she pulls the baby into her chest and the baby stops laughing. It stops breathing, and the little jerks on its hands and feet tell me that it's definitely not breathing anymore. It took 3 good swings of my baton to break the glass. All the while, my supervisor is screaming at me to get in, and get in there for fuck's sake. I crawl across the broken glass and reach across the seat, pulling the baby's head from her arms. It lets out a bloody wail, and Tracy turns to look me in the face. I see the driver's side door open, and Tracy just smiles at me. She then says, "You're just trying to take my baby, you white devil." It felt like it happened in an instant, but Tracy bares her teeth and bites down on the baby. I hear the baby screaming now in pure pain, and I reach forward, wrapping my arms around her lower jaw and upper forehead and pulled her off. Tracy goes limp, and the grandfather takes the baby inside to be treated. He lived, but we never found his ear. I saw her later in court after all the charges were dismissed in lieu of lifetime commitment to a mental institution. And all the life was just gone from her eyes, just like that night. The lights were on, but no one was home. I still can't explain how an otherwise healthy and vibrant person can just go from zero to crazy like that, but it haunts me to this day more than any ghost story that I have ever heard. So, this story takes place around the time of the housing crisis back in 2008 or so. I was in high school at the time, and our buddy, I'll call Eric, and myself, we would do some urban exploring by sneaking into empty homes, abandoned and foreclosed. Of course, we'd do these explorations in the dead of night to avoid any trouble with the law and all that. I can't give away the location because, well, people now live there, and I really just have no scientific rational explanation for what happened. But I know what I saw and heard, so I'd like to share it with you all. So, we set out around 12 a.m. just like we would any night. About an hour or so in, we find a house that I often saw on my walks to school. As we walk up to the house, we scan for anyone, and then we make our way down the large driveway that leads into the backyard of the house. The first thing I noticed is how tall the grass was, like it hadn't been mowed in quite some time, months I'd say. And then I noticed a smaller house further near the back of the property. We told ourselves that we'd check that house out once we explored the bigger one that was. We entered the bigger house from the door that leads into the garage, and from the garage, we stepped into the kitchen. And believe it or not, the doors were unlocked. When we enter the kitchen, we see that the house was almost pitch black and we can only see a few feet ahead thanks to the streetlights. So I used my only light source at the time, a cheap flip phone with the screen brightness on max. We start our exploration down the hallway and check out each room, 5 in total counting the 2 living rooms. Eric is close behind me as we walk our way through each room and eventually back to the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, we chat about how nice the house is and its size, given the area it's in, much bigger than the surrounding houses. As we're talking, I notice a metal decoration hanging above the kitchen doorway. It almost looks like some sort of decorative shield. I pull it from its spot and inspect it closely. Once done, I can't figure out how to put it back up, so I set it in between my feet on the tile floor. I take a look at my friend and take a step into the kitchen. And then we both hear what sounds like something sliding along the floor and then a bang at the end of the hall. Eric and I, we both freeze and just stare at one another through the streetlight shining through the kitchen window. Eric whispers to me, "Is there someone here with us? Did someone follow us in?" And I honestly didn't know, but after a minute or two, we decide to walk down the hall and see what the noise was. As my phone light creeps to the end of the wall, we see the shield that I had just pulled down. We were both relieved, and I thought, well, maybe I kicked it when I stopped and just didn't notice. I picked it up, and this time I figured out how it needs to be attached to its original position. Once again, I look at Eric and take a step towards him, and I hear a few clangs on the floor and that familiar sliding across the floor and the bang against the wall again. And now, we're really scared and frozen, not moving for what seemed like forever. And then, an even louder bang is heard at the other end of the house, and we both jump and just stare into the dark hallway. And then, again, another bang, and then quiet, and then 3 rapid bangs. Someone was thrashing around in the very last room in the house, and we didn't know what the hell to do. Determined not to let this person scare us, we run towards the last room and confront this asshole, but when we get there, there's nothing, and no one. The room was completely empty. But how and who? We were sure that it was coming from this room, and there's no way whoever it was just slipped by us. I mean, the room had a sliding glass door leading into the backyard, but it was locked from the inside. And then, before we can gather our thoughts and ask each other what the hell was happening, there's more banging, and this time from the kitchen. Scared out of my mind, we both agree that it's just time to leave. We make our way through the back door in the room and finally to the street, all while checking over our shoulders to ensure that no one was going to come running out of the house after us. And no one came, and the neighborhood was quiet. Eric and I just start our walk home, talking about the house, when Eric notices that his pocket knife is missing. He then turns his pocket inside out to show me that he isn't joking too. We stop, and he keeps telling me that we have to go back for it since it's his favorite one. Frustrated, I ask him, "How did you lose it? It's your favorite knife." He assures me, though, that he never removed it from his pocket and has no idea how it could have been just removed like that. In the end, I agree to go with him and find it, and we make it halfway up the street when Eric tells me that his back feels like it's on fire. I can see that it's really bothering him too because of the expression of pain on his face. He asks me to lift his shirt and look at what could be causing the burning sensation. And I lift his shirt and quickly notice 3 really large scratches just starting from his right shoulder blade, going all the way down to his left hip, and then from his left hip across to his right hip. I tell him this, and he immediately says that he thinks the house is haunted, but he still wants to go and get his knife. I'm scared, but I'm not going to let him go alone, so we make our way back into the house and immediately hear that banging noise again. But we made a pact with each other that we would not run, no matter what happened. We begin our search for the knife, looking high and low, all the while hearing banging, and now things are being thrown across the room. Of course, I'm scared shitless and I want to leave, but we haven't found the knife yet. We do one pass through the entire house and we end up in the kitchen. In the kitchen, there's an entrance to the second living room that you can see from the backyard. And in that room, there's one piece of furniture, a hutch. Now, we had already checked this room since it's near our point of entrance and we found nothing. But we decide one more pass through the room wouldn't hurt. I make my way into the dark room and let my light lead me to the hutch. And there it is. On the hutch, we found the knife. But we for sure checked this room and the hutch before. Either way, he didn't hesitate for a moment, and he grabbed the knife and we just hightailed it out through the garage and back onto the street. But this is far from the end of the story. So we make our way to our homes, but the entire week we couldn't stop talking about the house and what was going on in there. We kind of brushed it off and didn't believe that there was not some sort of explanation, so we actually ended up going back. But this time, we bring 3 friends with us because they wanted to see this haunted house. While walking through the backyard, I can't explain it, but for some reason, I wanted to get a closer look at the back of the house. I start making my way towards the house, but I start to feel really scared. A feeling of dread that just came out of nowhere. I turn away from the house and start my way back up to the group, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something leap from the bushes. Some sort of dark figure leaped from the bushes and into the tall grass that I mentioned earlier. But when I gave it my full attention, it was just gone. I stared at the bushes for a moment, a little confused, but kind of brushed it off. I did mention it to the group when I caught up with them too, but it was quickly dismissed as just some sort of animal or something. We entered through the garage door, and this time we noticed a white bookshelf full of light bulbs in the garage. The bookshelf was probably about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide and completely filled with packaged light bulbs. We study it for a moment and make our way into the kitchen, with Eric leading and me in the back. I enter last and shut the kitchen and garage door behind me. As soon as I release the doorknob, though, we hear what sounded like someone in the garage breaking all the light bulbs on the bookshelf. Stunned, I remember my heart beating a mile a minute, waiting for whatever the hell it was to just start trying to fight its way into the kitchen. But nothing came, and Eric finally said, "I guess we're not going back now." We make our way to the very last room in the house, the same room that Eric and I had exited through the last time that we were there. And whatever it was, it did not disappoint. Random objects were being thrown against the wall in front of. We could hear loud banging all throughout the dark house, like there were people fighting in the damn house. One of the friends decides that he's just had enough and opens the glass door to the backyard, and the 4 of us start making our way through to the backyard too. I turn around to wait for Eric, and he was not moving. He was just kind of caught in a daze, standing in front of an unhinged door that was propped against the wall for support. Eric was staring down the hallway as if waiting for something. I had to call his name 3 times before he realized that we were leaving. He stepped forward, and before my eyes, it looked as though someone tried to throw the unhinged door on top of him. Eric jumped out of the way just in time and started towards me, scared out of his wits. The other 3 are already almost to the street, so we both just keep up the pace and catch up with them. As soon as we reached the street, one of the friends kept telling us just how messed up that house was. You could actually see the look of terror on his face too as he expressed his feelings about the place. He then mentions a burning feeling going up his calf. And sure enough, he's got those same damn scratches starting from his ankle and stopping midway through his calf. Just before we split up to go home, the 3 of them, they just swear off that place, and that was pretty much the last time that those 3 friends spoke to us. But there's a little bit more to this story yet. We ended up going to the house a few more times after that, but and nothing absolutely memorable happened. We heard the knocks and the bangs and whatnot, but it wasn't until we took Eric's, and I'll call him Derek for clarity and privacy, obviously, Eric's older brother, that it got really crazy. By this time, we visited the house a few times and had become numb to the banging and throwing. We found it more amusing than anything, like, check this place out, it's haunted. This time, though, it got way more aggressive. After touring the house and seeing Derek freak out, we decided to have a chat in the kitchen. I was standing in front of the window, just leaning against the windowsill, and Eric was to my right, leaning against the wall, and Derek was standing across from me in front of the doorway that leads into the second living room that I mentioned earlier. We talk about how scary the house is and all that, and Derek turned around to check out the living room behind him. I mentioned to him that that's the hutch that we found Eric's knife on after running the whole house searching for it. As he turns to face me, though, Derek just fell into the room, almost like something pushed or dragged him from behind. I remember looking at his face and seeing a look of terror as he tried to grab on for dear life to the doorway, but the push or pull was too strong and he just fell on his ass and into the room, but immediately jumped up and ran over to me. He grabbed me by my shirt and started screaming at me, "What the hell is your problem? Why did you push me?" I just kept telling him that I didn't push him, and Eric jumped between us and confirmed what I was saying. But Derek explains that someone or something had just pushed him in. After that one, we obviously wanted to leave, so we all agreed, but before we leave, Eric and I both told Derek to check his pockets to see if anything was missing. And, of course, his pocket knife is now missing too. But it's okay, right? I mean, we found the last one, and we'll find this one too. We searched the whole house and nothing, which, mind you, was kind of expected. But now it's time to check the hutch again. The first pass, there was nothing. The second pass, nothing. The third, nothing. Okay, so now this knife is really gone. Derek wants one more pass through the house, and we agree, and we make it to the far room with no luck. We started making our way back to the kitchen with me leading, and as I'm coming back to the kitchen, my cell phone light starts to reflect off something shining in front of the door that led into the front yard. It was the knife, but it was jammed deep into the door. But there was just no way that the knife could have been jammed into the door like that without any of us hearing it. Either way, Derek takes his knife and we just get the hell out of there. I never went back to the house after that because whatever was happening seemed to be escalating. And out of all the bullshit that went down in that house, that was the not welcome sign that I took seriously. And that's pretty much it. That's everything that I can remember. Eric actually moved not too long after that, and I moved away at the end of 2009. And I haven't seen the house since. Well, except when I tell the story to friends, and I'll pull up the house on Google Images or something. I do visit Eric from time to time still, and we always talk about what happened there.